Active Directory Certificate Services, Part 3. In this nugget, we're talking about Active Directory Certificate Services, and this is Part 3, where we start off by talking about certificate revocation. This is critical because if your revocation points cannot be located, then your CAs may not be able to issue certificates at all, and it could really bring you to a standstill. So this has to be smartly configured, and you have to know exactly where your CRIL distribution point is. We'll talk about that, as well as your authority information access. And when you configure where those are located, those are known as distribution points. One thing that's new with Windows Server 2003 is something called OCSP, or Online Certification Status Protocol, and that's going to be a much more efficient method for looking up revoked certificates than the CDP was. Also, we'll be taking a look at the certificate authority configuration. We've been mostly talking about a little bit about theory and stuff like that and things for planning purposes, but it helps if you can actually see a CA in action and see one configured, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll also talk about web server certificates and some important things to keep in mind to make sure that you have good continuity and availability for your web servers, and so that your clients don't get error messages when they encounter your certificates. We'll also talk about auto-enrollment. This is very critical and very useful for large organizations, especially that distribute lots of certificates. Smart cards are a great way to secure your environment so that users not only have to know a PIN, but they also have to physically present a smart card into the reader in order to be able to log on, for example. And it can be used for other things such as holding EFS certificates and the like, but very, very useful. Also, we'll take a look here at something called enrollment agents, which is very often used in conjunction with smart card enrollment. And this is something where a specific user or a member of a group will be given specific rights over a template and who they can enroll certificates for. Alright, as we get started in this nugget, I'd like to point out that, of course, this exam is a little bit more of an advanced exam than some of the earlier ones, such as the 70-640. So it doesn't focus as much on, here's where you click and next, finish, and here's a bunch of checkboxes. It's a little bit more on the design and the theory. Nevertheless, I do want to give you some sense of context, and we haven't really worked with the interface much in the first two nuggets that I talked about in this particular CA topic. So let's take a look here where I've created my own root CA. This is very easy to do. You simply go to Roles, and you'll simply click here on Add Roles, and then the certificate authority is one of the roles that you will add. Once you've added it in here, I do want to point out that usually you have to close Server Manager and open it back up again, because although it'll say Active Directory Certificate Services here, none of this stuff branches out. You can't click on any of this other stuff under here until you close it and reopen it. Also, I find it kind of oddly counterintuitive that even if you're using a standalone CA like this root CA that I'm working with here, it'll still call it Active Directory Certificate Services, even though it has nothing to do with Active Directory at all. They probably could have named that better and just called it Certificate Services or something. But regardless, it's all here. I also want to point out that when I did the installation, I specified that I wanted to enable web enrollment, which then installs IIS. I'm not really interested in web enrollment so much. It was just a quick and easy way to get IIS installed, and the reason I wanted it here was so that it could also be available as a certificate revocation list location. Okay, now, I do want to point out a few other things here. First of all, let's take a look at some brief properties here. And as I go to this CA right here and choose its properties, one of the most important things to check on here is your certificate revocation list. And that's going to appear under extensions and the certificate revocation list distribution point, or the CDP. Now, here we have several different locations. These are all there by default. I haven't touched any of these things. The top one and the bottom one are actual physical file locations. This is useful for this local server to reference, but the client computers that are checking against the CRIL will not use these specific file locations. They'll either use an LDAP location, which is not as directly relevant since I don't actually even have Active Directory installed here. What I could do, though, is I could set up an LDAP location and I could manually put it in something like a manually configured LDS partition or something like that. And then here's an HTTP location. And you see here that these are just a bunch of variables, server DNS name, and it's not really all that easy to read. But if you want a little bit of assistance on that, this is at one place where the help system's actually good, and it kind of decodes all of the different variables for you so that once you click on help here, if it ever comes up, you should be able to see a table here with all of the translations for you that you can see right there. Okay? All right, so that's what this is all about. This is where we have our certificate revocation list distribution point. And another thing to keep in mind with this list is that you might want to scratch this whole thing. You might want to just remove, and take all of them out, and then add back in the order in which you expect your clients to be able to access them most frequently. For example, if you're using OCSP, which I'll also discuss after a little while here, this is a new way that's available with Windows Server and Vista to be able to access the certificate revocation list, but it actually uses a web page. So in that case, I'd remove all these and then I would add them in so that the HTTP was available first. And if it tries to locate one of these locations and it can't find it, it'll time out after 10 seconds and then move on down to the next one on the list. So for performance reasons, choose the most likely found one at the top of the list and the most available one. And now let's also just minimize this for a moment to talk a little bit more about certificate revocation. This is, again, very important because we want to make sure that when our clients check a certificate that's been issued by MyCA, that they can check against a revocation list to see whether or not that certificate has been revoked prior to its normal expiration. So with our certificate revocation, one thing that's critical is that you must configure the certificate revocation strategy and configuration before issuing any certificates. And let me show you why. Let me go back to this one, for example. If this were, like an issuing CA, which is the bottom level of our three-tier architecture that I showed you in the last nugget, then I might be issuing dozens or hundreds of certificates every day. And if it turns out that, oops, this was not really well configured, and I come back in here and I tear the whole thing apart and I reconfigure it from scratch, well, guess what? All those certificates that I've already issued, they will remain with this old, stale data. There's no way to automatically update a certificate that's already been issued with updated certificate revocation list information. So I've got to make sure that I've got this exactly the way I want it before I issue any certificates. Okay, otherwise you could really run into some consistency problems. All right, so make sure you configure that, and then just keep in mind that there are a few different revocation extensions. First of all, there's the CRIL. This is the list of all the certificates that have been revoked prior to their normal expiration. This is like a full list of items, and then the Delta CRIL is only things that have been changed since the last CRIL was updated. If you want to think of this kind of like the difference between a full backup and a differential backup, that's kind of the idea that we're looking at here. These are only the changes since the last full CRIL. And then there's the Authority Information Access, and we have here something new called the Online Certificate Status Protocol, or OCSP, yet more acronyms that we have to memorize. And this is also something that's new in Windows Server 2008 that will allow your PKI clients to determine whether or not a certificate has been revoked virtually in real time. So it's very, very up to date. Whereas prior to this, when you depend on a CRIL, you might have a CRIL update schedule that takes place, let's say, at 8 o'clock in the morning. But then at 9 o'clock, if you revoke a certificate, it's going to be 23 hours before that's updated in the CRIL, because we don't update our CRILs except for, every morning at that time. So it's at 8 o'clock. So it's really going to be a little bit, not quite as updated as something like an OCSP. And we'll discuss this as well as we go. Now then you'll also want to think about which publication points to use. I mean, we saw a few choices there. The one is the file system, which is probably the least of the best choices. And then there was also HTTP and LDAP. I mean, which one do you prioritize? Which one's better? Well, it depends on your situation. For HTTP, one of the advantages there is it's usually pretty up to date. And normally when you update the CRIL, the HTTP location will be updated just almost directly thereafter. So it's pretty well live, almost live data. Also, it's very firewall friendly. You probably already have port 80 open through any firewall so that you already can make other websites and things available, or your intranet website or something. So it's pretty firewall friendly. You don't have to open up special ports or anything like that. And it's also very useful for legacy clients or down-level older clients that would not otherwise be able to read LDAP data. So if you have any really old clients, that might be useful. Also, if you have clients that are not part of the forest, well, again, HTTP is readable by almost anybody, so they should be able to read that. And if you have other operating systems, such as non-Windows operating systems, specifically is what I'm talking about here, such as Unix operating systems, for example. Well, again, they might not be able to, depending on their configuration and which version, they might not be able to read LDAP data either, so you might need to go with HTTP there. And if you have mostly non-Windows clients and non-Forest clients or other operating systems that are receiving your certificates and need to check the krill, well, you'll probably make HTTP at the top of the list. Otherwise, if you're in kind of a normal, so to speak, Active Directory environment, you might prefer LDAP. But this would only be the case, really, if we're using CDPs, a common CDP. Okay, we'll talk about AIA in a little while there. But with the CDP, LDAP is going to be widely available because you have domain controllers that contain that information. All of the certificate revocation list is actually stored in the configuration naming context within Active Directory. So all your domain controllers will have a list of all the revoked certificates, very widely available to your Windows clients that are part of Active Directory. There's a timeliness issue that could be a thing there, though. If you're in a medium organization in one building, for example. Well, if the krill gets updated on one domain controller, within one site, it'll only be a matter of seconds before it's updated on all the other domain controllers in your site. But if you're in like a worldwide global organization with multiple sites on different continents, it could take a long time, relatively speaking, for all of your domain controllers to come to convergence worldwide. And so it might not be quite timely in that kind of a respect. And that's not necessarily wrong or bad. It's just something to think about in terms of your strategy. Now, another thing to think about here, going back to this CDP, is that this can get to be pretty large. I mean, if you're a large organization that's issuing thousands of certificates, and then you're going to have potentially also a large certificate revocation list. Now, here's the problem. Your clients, even your generic laptop user, when they receive a signed email from one of your other users, they have to check that certificate against the certificate revocation list. Guess what happens? That client has to download the entire krill. I mean, there could be thousands of entries in that krill, and so this could potentially be a performance issue. They might have to download it over a slow WAN link or a slow dial-up link or something like that. Not really all that great. So instead, what we can do, you always want to keep this and have it configured, but you can also use smartly configured AIA, which works in conjunction with an OCSP. And I throw all those acronyms at you to baffle you hopelessly. No, we've already explained what those mean, but boy, that is a lot of acronyms. Anyway, the locations are similar here, just like you see in the previous list. However, this works in conjunction with the OCSP right now. Remember, that's the Online Certificate Status Protocol. And what happens here is, with an OCSP server, this is a particular role that you'll configure on a server. It doesn't have to be a CA. It could simply be, just a server that has only the OCSP role on it. And this is going to download the entire krill. So the krill downloads the entire list. Okay, and the OCSP, when the clients check against it, they're only going to verify a single certificate. Okay, they're not going to have to download the entire krill. They just say, hey, is this particular certificate good? The OCSP checks just for that certificate against the krill that it has downloaded, and then it says whether or not it's been revoked. And all this is also signed data. There has to be a specific certificate that's used by the OCSP to sign that data for security purposes. Also, it gives you really timely revocation data. You don't really have to wait for the same kind of replication that we might have to with other methods. This is really pretty well up to date. It's a lot less traffic because we don't have to download the entire krill. It's also trustworthy because I said earlier, it's digitally signed. There's a specific OCSP certificate that your OCSP server has to use. And then when it responds to an OCSP query like this, or a revocation query, it signs it with its certificate. That way, I can prevent the potential of some hacker sneaking into my network and setting up a fake OCSP server. Now, Vista clients do have native support for this as well as 2008, and that's kind of a given. But if you have older clients and you still want to use an OCSP provider, you can do that. OCSP is not a Microsoft invention, and there are third-party products such as Tumbleweed that can allow you to do that. You don't need to know that for the exam. I'm just telling you that if you want to use it in your environment and you have maybe XP clients. So here, just to summarize once again with the Online Responder, it checks the status of a single certificate, and it doesn't download the entire krill to the client. Only Vista or 2008 can use this Online Responder. This is, by the way, when you set up your OCSP server, then it's called an Online Responder. That's why I say Online Responder up here instead of OCSP. Why does Microsoft call it an Online Responder in one place and an OCSP in another? Again, to make things as confusing as possible. Also, we have OCSP signing certificates. That's what I was mentioning earlier, that will be used to validate the traffic that it really does come from the online responder. And you can use an array and network load balancing to make sure that you have high availability. We can't really see it in any of my interfaces yet because we're not completely configured yet. But once you configure an online responder, there will be an opportunity for you to set up an array, which means you can add additional online responders there and then make it fully available as well. You can use network load balancing to make sure that you have high availability. Okay, as I keep promising, I'm going to go ahead and configure a CA here. Now, I've already kind of started the wizard in the Add Roles section here, and I'm going to go ahead and just specify how I would configure an intermediate CA. First of all, I need to send a certificate request to my parent CA, which is my root CA, which is CA Nugget 1, which is the one we've been looking at so far. I can browse by a CA name or by a computer name. I'll just choose computer name. Otherwise, I could save it as a request file, as you can see in the other option there. And I'm going to call this CA Nugget 1, and we'll look for that server. And there it appears. Okay, so now we have a server that we're pointing to send a certificate request to. Like I said earlier, you couldn't see it earlier because it was kind of blocked. I could save the request as a file. This also actually might be a good idea if you don't want to even bring your root CA on the network. If you're really paranoid and you don't want it to have any chance of being hacked. Then I could save this to a thumb drive or something like that, then transport it as a file to my actual root CA, then request the certificate from there by importing that as a request. Here we just specify the database and database log locations. I'm going to leave them in the default locations for now. And then we have IIS in this case because I'm setting this up so that it will support web enrollment. If you do, then you'll get this prompt right here. And then you can just leave the default options here. These are only the minimum requirements that it needs to be able to support online enrollment. And that's pretty much it. You click Next and Install, and that's it. All you have to do now is wait for it to finish the wizard, and then you can restart the computer management, or rather the server management console, and you'll be ready to go. And to summarize that and to go back here, what I just did, that wizard you saw me working with, was like on one of these level intermediate CAs, and it was requesting a certificate from this CA. Now the certificate will appear here as a pending request. I'll have to right-click to choose Issue, and then it will be available to install on this CA. Once that's been done, it will now be available to issue certificates further on down the line to my enterprise issuing CAs, which we see down here. And at that point, I can then turn off both of these. In fact, once this certificate's been issued, I can turn this one off. Once this certificate has issued certificates to any of my issuing CAs, I can turn that one off. Okay, so I finished the wizard, restarted Server Manager, and here I am at the CA, but it's not really started yet. So I could choose All Tasks and Start Service, but then it will give me messages saying that it doesn't have a certificate, and do I want to install one, or do I want to request one? Well, one's already been requested. When I started the wizard, remember I pointed to this CA right here, which is my root CA. There's the request now. You see that it's in my pending requests? So now what I have to do here is to right-click and choose All Tasks, and then choose Issue, and we can see that immediately it goes up here to Issued Certificates. So here I need to get this certificate over to my other server there, my CA Nugget 2 server. So what I can do here is, a couple of different ways of doing this, but I'll just go to Details, Copy to File, and we'll quickly go through this wizard. And I'll include all certificates in the certification path. Why? Because at that intermediate CA, it's not going to have this root CA in its path because it doesn't trust this CA quite yet. Since I'm manually doing this and I know where the certificate is coming from, I'm going to kind of forcibly install that certificate, if you will. And now here I'll click on Browse, and I'm going to put it in a file share in this particular case. I can also put it on a thumb drive like I mentioned earlier, or something like that. But I've already created a share in advance just called Certs, and I'll just call it CA Nugget 2. Okay, and we'll save that out. And then just Next and Finish. That's pretty much all there is to it. Okay, now that's been done. I'm going to go back over here to CA Nugget 2 and pull out that certificate. So I'm going to go here to right-click, All Tasks, Install a CA Certificate, and I can UNC to it, or if I have a map network drive, or just plug in my thumb drive, whatever I've decided to do. CA-Nugget 1, and we'll go to my certs, and there's CA Nugget 2, which is the file I just saved a moment ago. So now as I install that, here's where it tells me the root certificate is untrusted. Well, don't panic quite yet here, because this is what I just mentioned. The root CA is not trusted here. I do want to trust the root CA on this machine and complete the installation. So I'm just going to click OK here, and it's going to go ahead and complete the rest of that. Now, once that's been done, I should be able to right-click here and choose Properties. Oops, I got to start the service. So I'll cancel this and start it up, because I've now installed the certificate. So I'll start the service. Got too clicky fast on there for you. Anyway, we get this going, and now we'll see that we do have a certificate installed, which we can look at by going to the properties here, and we'll then be able to service any other requests that we might have. Notice I have handy little green checkbox there. So that's good news, and that's pretty much it. Now I go to the properties of it, and there I can view my certificate, and there we go. Now, I'm really pretty well done with that top level CA, this root CA. This is where I can now cross it off. In fact, let me just do that. I really don't need it at all. So over here I'm on CA Nugget 1. Let me close this up. It seems to shut down better if I close that up. And now I'm just going to go ahead and shut it down. That's pretty much it. I'll just enter in no reason here for the time being. I sure want to shut it down. Yes, this is just simply telling me that if it's a remote computer with nobody in that office and I accidentally shut it down, there's no way to turn it back on again. So that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and shut it down, and that's all there is to that. And I won't need this root CA to come back online unless I need to update the krill, or I need to update our certificates, or they start to expire, or I need to renew a certificate on one of these intermediate CAs, then I need to bring it back online. Now then finally here I've gone to CA Nugget 3, where I want to install an enterprise CA. This computer is a member of the domain, and as a result it will be capable of working with certificate templates and auto-enrollment, and this is the bottom tier of my infrastructure. Now here I'm going to make the certification authority, the online certification authority web enrollment. Okay, rather online responder. And then I could do network device enrollment service, but not right now, because if I click now, watch, it gives me a big red X. You have to set up the CA first, and then you have to return to the wizard to install that particular role. Then I want to make this again an enterprise CA, and that option is only available because I happen to be a member of the domain. And this is not a root CA, this is a subordinate CA to my intermediate CA. Okay, and I want to create a new private key. If I had an existing server that had a hardware failure or something like that, and I'd already exported the private key, I just could use that and then not change any of the cryptography of any of this. But this is a brand new server, so I'm going to choose create a new private key. Now, the root CA has a key length of 4096. The intermediate's 2048. So, as I mentioned in our first nugget on CA topics, you usually kind of half this each time as you go down, and you also half the duration of the certificate. So 1024 is fine for the bottom tier in my case, but just whatever your security requirements are is fine. And that's pretty much it. Now I click on Next, and I have to specify that I want a certificate request. And here I've just gone ahead and quickly entered in a UNC path to a share that I have over there, and I just called this one CA Nugget 3.req for request. And I just doing this way to show you, another alternative method for doing that. And then that's pretty much it. I'm just going to kind of next my way through this until we're done and install it. And then the same as I did in the last one, once this is complete, then I'll go ahead and make sure that the certificate is issued, and then we'll go ahead and start this up. Now here I've switched back over to CA Nugget 2. I right-clicked here, it shows all requests, and I chose to submit a new request, and this was the REQ file that I exported earlier. So once I select that option, it asked me to browse for it. I selected it, and I chose Open. Once I had done that, it then appears here in the pending request, which I just do the same exact thing with. I just right-click and choose Issue if I really want it to be issued, and of course I do. So then now it's been issued, and I can go back to this particular server and continue on. And so here again I'll expand things out, and by the way, offline I took the certificate that was issued on CA Nugget 2 and exported it to a file so that we can then import it right here. So I'll right click, choose Install the CA certificate, then here is my certificate over on CA Nugget 2. Okay, so I'll just open that up, and then we'll go ahead and get it installed. And that's all there is to it. Now all I'd have to do is to right-click here, choose All Tasks, and Start Service. Remember, from a practical standpoint, though, even though I could demonstrate that right now, in the real world, what I'd want to make sure I do is to properly configure my revocation list and point my clients to the proper location there before I install any certificates. Also, if I have any certificate templates that I want to issue, remember that these are only available on two versions of Windows Server 2008. That's Enterprise Edition and Data Center Edition. And these are also only available on certificate authorities that are configured as enterprise CAs. Okay, so there's two different uses of enterprise there. I don't want to confuse you. One's an enterprise CA, and the other one is that you can configure that on an enterprise edition or a data center edition of the operating system. So anyway, if you wanted to custom configure some of these things, you could. But for my case, I'm just ready to go ahead and start this service up. So I'll right-click here, choose Start Service. Now, it does have to be able to go through the certification revocation list of its own. So when it goes back up the chain to confirm that its parent CA has issued a valid certificate and so forth, it does need to be able to run certificate revocation checking up that chain. And for current purposes, we're okay because CA Nugget 2 was still on, and offline I started up the CA root again as well so that we could check its krill as well as we checked up through the chain. And by the way, when I keep talking about that, let me go back here to our properties. You may already be aware of this, but just to be clear on it, I'm going to go to the certificate here and certification path, and I wanted to be able to check the chain all the way up through to the root that we see up here at the top. Okay, so that's what we were checking on for that. Okay, now, how do we set up an online responder? This, again, is something that you need to know just in terms of the fact of what an online responder does. Remember, it's part of the OCSP configuration I talked about earlier. But what we do with this is we have to have a certificate that we issue to an online responder. Now, in this case, I'm just going to put the online responder role on the same server as my issuing CA, but you could, again, put it elsewhere. What happens is when the clients check for a certificate to see if it's been revoked, it actually makes an HTTP request, so you do have to have a web server involved. But it will then communicate with the online responder role here, which has downloaded the full krill for you. Okay. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at our certificate templates. These are the things that I said earlier that you could duplicate if you want to, but we don't really need to in this case because all I need to do is to go to the properties of this one and go to security, and I could add in a security group of computers or specific computer names as those that I want to be able to enroll for this particular certificate. In this particular case, I'm at CA Nugget 3. I'm going to check the name there, and it doesn't let me because I did not choose the computer's object type. I always do that. I always forget to check that checkbox. So anyway, there it is, and OK. And all I need to do is to have the read and enroll. Now, various Microsoft documentation says that you have to auto-enroll, and then it will say, even in the same documentation later on, it says never choose auto-enroll. So it's a little bit confusing. The fact of the matter is you should never choose auto-enroll because there are certain security problems, whereas it could continue to request or auto-enroll the same certificate multiple times. It's just kind of a weird thing with this particular certificate template that does not apply to all templates. Auto-enroll is good in many other situations. For now, we'll choose read and enroll only. And then what we would want to do is to get that certificate. And I do that by going down to my certificate templates, right-click, choose New, Certificate Template to Issue, and then I can just use my OCSP Response Signing Certificate. And now you see that it does appear here. So now that I've gone ahead and configured this, I'm able to go ahead and request the certificate, but I don't do it in a normal method. What I do here is I go to my revocation configuration up here, and I'll right-click to choose Add Revocation Configuration. That's the way this is done. Okay. So once that's been done, starts our handy little wizard here, and I'll just go ahead and click on Next. And then I'll specify the name of the revocation configuration. I'll just leave it what I've got already. I'll just call it CA Nugget 3. Because I'm not that creative. So we'll go ahead and click on Next here. And then I can select a certificate for an existing enterprise CA, which is the same CA I'm looking at right now. Select certificate from the local certificate store if I already had a certificate, which I don't, or import it from a file if I had to do a manual request or something like that. I'm okay with the one I've got. And then I'll browse CA certificates published in Active Directory. And this certificate that I've got issued here to CA Nugget 3 should be listed in Active Directory, and there it is. So I'll click OK. And then here it just shows me a link telling me that it is a confirmed certificate. I can click it and actually see that certificate. Then I'll go ahead and click on Next. And here's where I want to point out, even though I did not give that certificate template the auto-enroll permission, I can still do an auto-enrollment here. This is a really weird kind of an interface. This is the only place that I know of that you can do this, where you don't configure it to auto-enroll, and yet you can auto-enroll. Okay. I can also, again, manually select a signing certificate or use the CA certificate for revocation configuration. Automatic is just the easiest way to go, and it's fine for our purposes. So then I'll just click on Next. If you want to further configure this in terms of identifying, where revocation lists are located and so forth, you can go to the provider button and specifying these locations or adding different ones in or moving them up or down and so forth. And I can also enter in delta crills there, of course, as well. So then I just click on finish, and that's pretty much it. Now, the only other thing to keep in mind here is that I can also go to the array configuration. Notice that I already have CA Nugget 3 here, but if I want to give myself good availability, I'll need to add in additional servers into this array, based on different sites that I have available and so forth, for example. So I'd right-click here and choose Add Array Member, and then you'd have to browse for and find other computers. I don't really have any others, but if I had more, I could add them in here. And then again, network load balancing is also a very good way to give yourself high availability. Network load balancing is also very good, by the way, for purposes of using a web page. So this might sound a little bit off topic, but it's really not particularly off topic. Let's go ahead and take a look. And the way that this is relevant is that web servers will often use certificates. Now, if it's just serving up generic HTML pages that don't have any security implications, there's probably not any certificates there. But if you need to use HTTPS and SSL connections, then maybe for some kind of authentication, for example, or a login, then those clients are going to need to be able to identify and use the certificates on the web server. There are templates that are available. There is a template available for web servers, so you can customize that to your own purposes, although a lot of it's already pre-configured pretty well for us. The other thing you want to keep in mind there is that the name of the proper server is in the certificate. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of times you'll have a web farm where there might be, let's just say, a dozen web servers there. They're all accessed by the same name, www.nuggetlab.com. But in reality, the physical name of the server is, web server 1, web server 2, web server 3, and so forth. It's not really named www.nuggetlab.com. Now, the certificate needs to have the name of the server that clients will expect, so www.nuggetlab.com. Otherwise, when they access that web server, they're going to get an error message saying the name of the server does not match the name of the certificate. Do you want me to proceed? And the reason for that warning is because it could be that someone's trying to do an impersonation or something, or has stolen a certificate. So you don't want to have that if at all possible. That's why you need to name the certificate. The name of the server is proper in the certificate. Then what you'd want to do is, if you had something like a web farm, or if you're using network load balancing or something, each one of your physical servers should have that same certificate installed on all the web servers. And then they'll all be able to respond to whatever, www.nuggetlab.com or something. Now, this is primarily for my internal clients and for my own certificates that are under my purview. If, however, I have public internet clients that are accessing my web servers or external clients, then I'm going to need to get certificates for my web servers from an external CA so that they will have the proper root or intermediate CAs already in their trusted authorities, like we talked about early in this topic. Otherwise, they also will get an error message, and we don't want that because that will be confusing to end users, and we don't want anyone to have a security concern that's unnecessary. But these external CA certificates won't raise that issue. Now let's talk here about auto-enrollment, which is a whole lot easier than manual enrollment, especially if you have thousands of users and computers. To do this, we're going to have to, first of all, duplicate the template, and specifically the user template. There's already a computer template there that you should not have to duplicate. It should already be available for auto-enrollment. But you can duplicate the user template for sure. Okay, and you can name it whatever makes sense to you. I'm going to demonstrate all this. Then we'll have the permissions that it needs. You need to have read permission, enroll permission, and auto-enroll permission. Then you need to publish that certificate template as an available template. And we'll see that as well. Then you need to configure a group policy object for the computer if you're going to issue computer certificates, or for the user if you're going to issue user, or both. Then, in order to, if you want to see the certificate issued close to immediately, you could run gp update, which is a command that we use to kind of kick off the refreshment of the policies. Otherwise, it would take place. You just have to wait for a while for it. And then you can also use the certutil, and that should actually be a hyphen pulse if necessary. And what that will do is it'll attempt to enroll the certificate immediately. So here I've gone over to CA Nugget 3, and I'm going to configure auto-enrollment. It's really pretty easy. Let's take a look at what we do. First of all, there's certificate templates, and I'm going to start with the computer one. Here, I don't really need to mess with anything. There's already a computer certificate template down here that will suffice for this, so I'm going to leave that one as is. But for the user side, I do need to configure that one, so I'm going to right-click and choose Duplicate Template, and I'm going to make this compatible with Windows Server 2008 and also Vista. It doesn't really say it there, but it also works with Vista, and that gives us capability of using our new certificate template versions, which were the version 3 ones that I talked to you about. So I'm going to call this User Nugget Lab. Okay. And then here I can specify the validity period. Remember, for this type of certificate, it's going to be a shorter validity period, but also a shorter key length. And then about 6 weeks prior to it expiring, it can start to try to renew its certificate. I can publish the certificate in Active Directory, which is the default, and that's a good idea, so that I can get that certificate recovered in case it gets deleted or lost or corrupt or whatever. And then I could choose to not automatically re-enroll it if there's already a certificate there. Then, if for automatic renewal of smart card certificates, if there's already an existing key, then I can use that key if it already exists in Active Directory. But I don't need to do that unless a new key cannot be created. And those somewhat explain themselves. But let's go ahead and take a look at some other things. Over here on the Subject Name tab, notice that I can supply in the request, but if I do that, then I cannot use auto-enrollment. So I want to use auto-enrollment, then I have to build the information from Active Directory. And I have to have included anything that's checkboxed in here. So if I include the email and subject name and select an email name here, then I'm going to have to be able to also have an email account configured in that user account. Now, if I have left that blank, or I'm working with test accounts, for example, but I never bother to fill in an email name, then this automatic enrollment will fail. The other thing to look for here is on the Security tab. For my domain users, I want them to be able to read and enroll and auto-enroll to be able to receive these certificates. Okay, so I'll click OK. Now, I'm almost ready for that part of it, except that I need to now go down here to Certificate Templates and choose New Certificate Template to Issue, and then I'm going to scroll down to my User Nugget Lab item, and there it is. I just simply double-click on it, and it's now available. The next thing I would need to do then would be to go here to Features. Actually, I'll need to go over to this computer and go to the Features and Group Policy Management, which we address elsewhere in this series. If you want to find out more about group policy, look at that particular nugget. For my purposes, I've got a group policy object here called Auto-Enroll User and Computer Search. Now, I may sometimes set that up in two separate policies. For my current purposes, for sake of simplicity and compactness, we're going to put those both in the same one. But I want to configure my user configuration first. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go down here to my Policies and Windows Settings. Then I'll go to Security Settings. Then I'll go to Public Key Policies, and this is where I configure auto-enrollment. Notice that here it says Certificate Services Client Auto-Enrollment. I have to say Enabled, and then I can renew expired certificates, update pending, and remove revoked certificates. That's a good thing to do. Helps keep things nice and clean and up to date. And then I'll update certificates that use certificate templates. And so that means then that if the certificate template has a change made to it, then my certificate, when it gets renewed, can adapt to those changes. And I can also show an expiration notification. This is not available for computer auto-enrollment because this will show a notification to the user that they then interact with by clicking on, OK or yes or something like that. And then this will just tell them that their certificate is about to expire and prompt them to renew it. Now then over here on a Vista client, this is I've switched quickly over here to a Vista computer, and I've gone to create a custom console here to include the certificates. Now we don't see any personal certificates there. I can refresh the screen, still don't see anything. So what can I do? Well, first of all, this particular computer is probably not aware of the group policy object that I just configured. So I'll need to run a GP update. And the other thing is I can use certutil-pulse, and that will kind of give it a kick in the pants and tell it to go out and look for a certificate. So here I'm going to run GP update /force from a command line, and we'll give that a moment to percolate there. And then once that's been done, I have certutil-pulse, and that's something that I typed in wrong. So how about we type it in properly? Certutil I typed in, I got a backslash in there. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, so certutil-pulse. Now that command completed successfully. Now, I'm going to refresh the screen again and show us the certificate. Normally, you don't have to do this. The certificate will get there in its own good time. And it's not usually really late. It'll just take a little longer. Just for demonstration purposes, though, it's much more gratifying if I can show you this almost immediately. So we'll refresh here and try to find it. Okay, I'm going to be honest. When I initially refreshed this screen, nothing happened. I didn't get any certificates. So I didn't know quite what happened there, honestly. And then it occurred to me I totally forgot to do something, which I'll show you about right now. You see, over here on CA Nugget 1, I had to go here and I had to export my certificate. Now, if I go to Properties, I went to this certificate here, and I went to Details, and I copied it to a file. Okay. Once I'd copied it to a file, I just put it right here. Okay, and then I did the same thing on CA Nugget 2. Now, the reason why I had to do that is because since those are standalone CAs, they're not automatically added in by Active Directory into my trusted root certification authorities. So what I had to do then was I went into a group policy, and let me go back to this. Okay, I went back to my group policy here, and I'll edit this. And I went to my trusted root certification authorities, and I right-clicked here, it shows import, and then I just browsed for the file location, found it, and it imported it right here. I did the same for intermediate certification authorities. Actually, I did this CA Nugget 2, but when I did this, I also included the parent, so it also brought that one in. I didn't have to bring that one in, but it did. But anyway, I did the same thing there. I exported or copied to a file CA Nugget 2's certificate, and then I imported it here in the policy as well. Now, as a result of that, if I go into my certificates, we now see that I have trusted root certification authorities here, and sure enough, there's CA Nugget 1. Likewise, on the intermediate certification authorities, I have certificates here, and sure enough, there's CA Nugget 2 and CA Nugget 1. Again, I don't need the first one, but it's okay if it's here. So now, once I had done that, I was able to then successfully get the certificate. I just refreshed the screen here. Then I saw that I had a certificate right here. If I double-click on it, I can see that the certification path goes all the way up through my hierarchy, and I'm good for, all the common purposes for this certificate. Now, for the computer side of things, it's very similar to what we did for the user side of things. So here I'm under Computer Configuration Policies, Windows Settings, Security Settings, Public Key Policies, and again, Certificate Services Client Auto Enrollment, where I'll enable this, and these are the exact same settings that we had for the user side of things, except for, of course, they apply to the computer. And, of course, the computer cannot interact with anything, so there's no option there. Then what we will do is we'll go to the Automatic Certificate Request Settings, and we need to choose a new Automatic Certificate Request. Now, what's weird about this is I have not configured auto-enrollment on any certificate or certificate template for the computer, but they're just kind of hard-coded to allow that. So I'll click on Next here. There's the computer certificate or template that I can choose from. Then I'll click on Next and Finish, and that's pretty much it. Now my computers will be able to automatically enroll for certificates. But let me make an emphasis again of that last point that I just mentioned, that I had not custom modified any templates or anything like that. This is here out of the box in our certificate templates, and it's really pretty plain. There's not a whole lot here, just kind of general purpose certificate for computers. If I go up here to Certificate Templates, then we can go to the computer item right here. Notice that when I go to the Security tab, there's been no auto-enrollment or even any enroll item. I mean, look, I click on Domain Computers. It doesn't say read. It just says enroll. There's nothing really particularly fancy here or anything like that. I didn't have to fiddle with this or custom modify any permissions or anything like that. It's just ready to go right now. So what I'll do is I'll go over here to the Vista Client 01. And let's go back over here to the certificates for the local computer. On the personal, we don't see any certificates quite yet. So we'll just go ahead and give this a jump start here by doing a GP update. I'm going to do /target computer to save a little bit of time, because the policy that I'm applying only applies to the computer, not to the user. So that way I don't have to wait for the user side to finish. And then again, certutil-pulse. Now as I go back out here and I refresh the screen, I click my little refreshy button right there. Then we should see under Personal, now we have certificates, and what do you know, but there it is. And again, you can identify, the purposes of this, the full certification path. Everything's looking really good. Now, switching gears here to smart card configuration, remember that for this, you need to use an Enterprise CA. So again, of course, this means that you need to have Data Center Edition or Enterprise Edition of Windows Server 2008. Because Enterprise CAs need those versions, and this also means that it'll be a member of Active Directory, and we need that because we're going to validate the credentials and identity of the person that we're enrolling by using Active Directory data. Now, to make this work, what you'll do is you'll duplicate the smart card template, and then if you want to make any custom changes to it, you certainly can do that, of course. And then you configure your enrollment permissions. You can do this and just leave it at the account operator. They already have the ability to enroll smart cards, or you can assign a specific group the ability to do that, and I'll show you that in the interface shortly. That's pretty much a new feature of Windows Server 2008 that's pretty cool. And then you do not have auto-enrollment with smart card configuration, and you don't want that. Normally, you want to have a smart card enrollment station, which is one or maybe a small number of just generic workstations, XP or Vista workstations, that can enroll smart cards for your users. And what you'll do is you'll have a very much a trusted person there that will be able to enroll those smart cards. They'll also have to validate that the person that's requesting a smart card is really who they say they are. And in some companies, they'll have a supervisor or some other person walk in, let's say this new employee, and then enroll them that way and confirm their identity. That way you don't have just a stranger walking in claiming to be an employee who's really not and getting a smart card. So there's technical factors involved there, and there's human factors as well. You don't use auto-enrollment with the smart card configuration, as I mentioned. You do use a web page for that. And for that, you simply go to http:// and then the name of the server, whack, and then serve, CERTSRV, and that's it. And then you can issue the certificate from there. Now, in order to make this work, you do need to work with the certificate templates, as I mentioned a moment ago. So here we'll go with these certificate templates right here, actually. And we'll go to Smart Card User. And really, there's nothing here that I want to configure. Really want to duplicate it, I guess. So I'll right-click. Choose Duplicate, and you can use the 2003 or 2008 version. Again, the 2008 version allows me to use those fancy new cryptography next generation certificate types. So anyway, I'll just leave the default names in here, which should be fine. And then there's really not a whole lot else I need to do with this. If you have specific extensions you want to configure or something, that's fine here as well. I do need to go over here to security, and I would specify whichever user or security group it was that I wanted that would be able to enroll certificates. So for example, we don't want authenticated users to enroll, and in fact by default they're not configured to enroll. But maybe this is my smart card enrollment station employee that sits there every day and enrolls smart cards. Well, this person would then need the enroll permission, and again, we do not do the auto-enroll permission. And then what I would do is I'd have to go down here to Certificate Templates, and I'd right-click to choose New Certificate Template to Issue, and I would simply select my copy of Smart Card User, or whatever it is that I decided to name it. And then it would now be available here. Now, something that goes beyond this, though, is that you can be very granular in terms of determining who is allowed to issue these certain certificates. Now, to make that work, what you actually have to do is to go to Certificate Templates, and there's 3 different types of enrollment agents. This is a new function within Windows Server 2008. I can use an enrollment agent. This would be for users, for example, or for computers, or for Exchange. Now, the most common one is probably going to be for users and computers like we see here. And what I would have to do is I would have to issue this certificate template or duplicate it and then issue it, and then it would appear down here under certificate templates. And then what I'd have to do is to actually request this certificate and receive it. Once I have received this certificate, let's say we're for the trainer account, for example, then I also need to go to the properties here of my certificate authority and go to my enrollment agents. It's not enough just to have the certificate. You also have to configure the enrollment agents tab here, and I have to restrict the enrollment agents. And this simply tells me that we can only use this with Windows Server 2008 CAs or later. And I have to make sure that I've really designed it well for my particular situation. That's all that's really saying. Because you wouldn't want to get yourself into a situation where you accidentally require enrollment agents to enroll certain types of certificates that are impossible. Either certificate templates that don't exist, or you put yourself kind of into a black hole here. You could set up conditions that could not possibly actually exist. So just be real careful of that. Now what I would do here is I would click on Add, and I would say choose my enrollment agent. Maybe my trainer account has already requested and received the enrollment agent certificate. So I would enter in my trainer account here, for example, because they have that certificate, and they can then I can then decide which certificate templates they can manage. If I want them to be able to manage all certificate templates, well, then I just leave it as is. And then I would also adjust the permissions possibly. This means that they can manage all certificate templates for anybody that requests them. So, in other words, if I'm an enrollment agent, I can request a certificate on behalf of some other user using any template for any user. That's what this is saying as it reads right now. Now that's not very restrictive, because right now it also allows everyone to do pretty much the same thing. So you do need to make sure that you go back up here to everyone and choose remove, so you have only the specific enrollment agents that you want. And this would also be members of a security group, for example, or specific individual accounts like I've got right here. And then if you don't want them to manage all certificate templates, maybe you've only got specific ones in mind, then I could click on that item and I could say maybe I only want this for smart card users, so that they can enroll for smart card users. And this, by the way, is a very common function of the enrollment agent, is for smart card users. And then I could say, what do I want them to do? Well, I want them to enroll for either everyone in the entire company, or maybe this particular account is only within a certain branch office or something like that. So I would then add here only a specific branch office users of some kind. So maybe they were my Phoenix security group, or Phoenix users or something like that. If I had a security group like that, I would add them in down here instead. In fact, let me put some legs on that. I think I actually do have a Phoenix users, something like that. There it is, a Phoenix user security group. So what I could do is I could say, let's review this again. The trainer account can work with the smart card user certificate template. Okay, and I'll remove the other ones. Maybe we don't want them to work with all of them, only just this particular template. And we want them to enroll for not everyone, so I'll deny everyone, and I only want, or remove them, I can do that as well, and I only want them to be allowed to enroll for, on behalf of, anybody that's a member of this particular security group. So you can now get very granular in terms of who can do what with the various enrollments. In this nugget, we talked about Active Directory certificate services, and this was part 3, where we started off by talking about certificate revocation. Now remember, this is critical because if you cannot locate the distribution points, which point to the CRIL distribution point or the Authority Information Access, well then you may not be able to issue certificates to your subordinate CAs or to your clients, in fact. And also, a more efficient way of looking up revoked certificates for Vista and 2008 clients is to use the Online Certificate Status Protocol, or OCSP. We also took a look at CA configuration. I didn't really have to do that for this particular series because it's not quite as hands-on, but it does help if I go ahead and do it so that you can kind of get an idea for what we're looking at. So I went ahead and configured some of those things. And then we took a look at web server certificates as well. Remember, you have to have those properly named, and you have to install the same certificate on all the web servers that are going to be identified by the same name. Then we took a look at auto-enrollment. And this is very useful so that you can have your clients virtually enroll themselves after you've configured everything. We looked at smart cards, which are a great way to secure your users as well as your workstations. And we took a look at enrollment agents, which are often used in conjunction with smart cards, and they very often will enroll smart cards for those users. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.